Hi, this is Eve with True Crime and Coke. You are about to listen to an EDUsode. These are shorter episodes dedicated to educational information ranging from forensic terminology, crime facts, body processes, to interesting FBI files. But if you want to hear about true crime, disappearances, conspiracies, hauntings, and anything strange or unusual, then go to a regular episode. Disclaimer, I am not associated in any way to the criminal or medical field. In other words, I may not even know what I'm talking about. Now that that's out of the way, let's begin. Hi, this is Eve. Welcome to EDUsode 12. Today I am going to be reading some resources that are available to everybody on the FBI.gov website. It is the Serial Murder Pathways for Investigations. So I will read about 15 minutes of it and pretty much once or twice a week until we get through it all. So let's get started. Serial murder cases present numerous challenges and obstacles to law enforcement personnel who have the responsibility of investigating these complex cases. These cases involve multiple victims. The series may span days, months, or even years. They can involve several jurisdictions. The motive involved may not be easily discerned. Offender behaviors may not be consistent among all the cases, and there may be no obvious relationship between the offenders and the victims. Serial murder cases are also very rare, and most law enforcement investigators do not have the same level of experience in investigating serial murder as they do with other types of crimes. Additionally, the majority of serial murder cases involve offenders who kill for sexual reasons. The crime scene dynamics in sexually motivated murders can appear very different from those of other violent crimes. The physical and particularly the sexual interactions committed by offenders against victims are unusual, tend to appear bizarre, and can be difficult to interpret. Typologies. There have been many attempts to classify serial murderers into distinct, inclusive typologies or categories. These classification systems sought to link certain personality types or behavioral patterns with different serial murder series. The typologies divided serial murderers into distinct categories based upon the offender's behavior and perceived mental state at the time of the crime. Most of these studies utilized offender background and developmental information, as well as interviews with offenders to determine this information. All of the studies were offered as templates to assist investigators working unsolved serial murders by providing personality characteristics of unknown offenders based upon the typology. One of the earliest attempts was the organized-disorganized classification developed by the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, BSU, in the late 1980s, which it had Ressler, Burgess, Douglas, Hartman. It established two distinct dichotomous categories which were determined by an offender's behavior at a murder scene and were reflective of an offender's personality, development, and criminal history and social interactions. Generally, an organized offender was defined as an individual who planned his murders and displayed control at the crime scene. A disorganized offender was described as an individual who was spontaneous. Their crime scenes appeared more muddled, and the crimes were more opportunistic in nature. BSU held that organized offenders were more likely to plan a murder, utilize restraints, commit sexual acts on live victims, show or display control of a victim by manipulating or threatening, and use a vehicle during the commission of the murder. Disorganized offenders were more likely to leave weapons at the murder scene, pose the dead body, perform sexual acts on the dead body, keep a dead body, and not use a vehicle during the commission of the murder. The authors then applied organized and disorganized typology to their research project, which involved interviews with 36 serial and sexual murderers who killed a total of 118 victims. The organized-disorganized dichotomy was applied to these offenders to demonstrate its applicability. The results of this study have been widely reported and referenced. It has also been used extensively by criminologists. Nevertheless, the BSU members readily acknowledge that there are no situations where the organized and disorganized offenders are mutually exclusive. In an effort to acknowledge the diversity among offenders, in their 1992 book, Crime Classification Manual, the authors created another category of offenders in which they entitled Mixed. This category consisted of an offender who displayed characteristics from both the organized and disorganized categories. This third category simply indicates that serial offender behaviors are more accurately described as a continuum rather than a dichotomy. Dichotomous typologies by their nature have challenges as an either-or choice, cannot possibly explain complex, multiple human interactions. Therefore, this typology provides limited utility to law enforcement agencies investigating ongoing serial murder cases, given that most offenders display characteristics from both the organized and disorganized categories within this typology. Although BSU's earlier research into serial murder was groundbreaking in its attempt to provide characteristics of serial murders, there are serious shortcomings with the research construction. The agents from the BSU traveled around the United States to conduct law enforcement training classes. While at these training classes, they would identify convicted serial murderers in nearby prisons who they contacted for an interview. This approach created a sampling bias in opportunity sample, which weakened the integrity of this study. The sample size of this study was small, consisting of only 36 murders. This lessens the reliability of the results and diminishes any predictive value of the study. The study also depended on self-reported accounts from the murderers for a large portion of the information obtained. There are inherent limitations in utilizing this type of data, as some of the information cannot be validated independently. Due to these limitations, applying the organized-disorganized dichotomy to active serial murder cases has limited utility in serial investigation. Further, the NCABC has not embraced the organized-disorganized dichotomy for over 10 years and does not currently utilize the typology when reviewing cases in day-to-day operations. The most widely used motive-based categorical study is Ronald Holmes and James DeBurger's motivational model, which was also developed in the late 1980s. They identified 4 distinct motive types and delineated them as visionary, mission-oriented, hedonistic, and power control-oriented. The visionary type was described as killers who are classified as psychotic. These killers receive commands from voices or communicate with gods or other beings who demand the offender commit murder. Mission-oriented offenders kill to fulfill a need to take charge and to rid society of victims who they believe are burdens or are immortal. Hedonistic types kill to reinforce their quest for pleasure. They are divided into 2 subtypes, lust-oriented and thrill-oriented. Lust-oriented murderers are offenders who kill for sexual gratification. Thrill-oriented kill for their own excitement or thrills. Power control-oriented kill to exercise control and dominance over another human being. Holmes and DeBurger stated that they developed the individual category designations based upon case information from solved cases, as well as the characteristics of known offenders. Once the characteristics were identified, they used case examples that were specific to each of the individual categories to demonstrate the competence of their theory. In a subsequent work, Holmes and Holmes further delineated these categories, adding another category of the hedonistic type, described as comfort killers. These are offenders who kill for monetary gain. There are many drawbacks to this type of categorical design. Once the case information was obtained, there was a lack of any empirical testing of the data. Similar to the earlier FBI BSU study, the source data was obtained through self-report information that was gathered from interviews with offenders. Further, the individual categories, again, similar to the FBI BSU study, shared common characteristics across the typologies, making the determination of a single category difficult. In the late 1990s, Robert Keppel and Richard Walter adopted the rapist typologies originally devised by Groth and converted them into homicide categories. in their research concerning sexual assault, created 4 categories of rapists. They divided rapists into 2 general groupings, power rapists and anger rapists. They further divided the general groupings into 4 individual categories, labeled power reassurance, power assertive, anger retaliatory, and anger excitation. According to Keppel and Walter, the power assertive rape murder was planned as a rape, but escalated to murder because the offender either wanted to increase his control of the victim, and or the victim was killed to eliminate resistance by the victim, and or to increase the offender's feeling of power. The power reassurance rape murderer planned only the rape, but committed the murder when his seduction of the victim failed. The anger retaliatory rape murder planned both the rape and the murder. The murder allowed the offender to vent his anger by killing the victim and providing him with revenge on a symbolic target. The anger excitation rape murder raped and killed the victim sadistically to gratify himself. In this category, the rape and torture of the live victim were what satisfied the offender. Overall, the killing of the victim was just a necessity. In order to validate the use of the typologies put forth by Groth as distinct murder categories, Keppel and Walter reviewed the circumstances of murder cases from a group of killers incarcerated in a state prison system. Then they classified each individual murderer and placed them into one of the individual categories based upon the listed characteristic. According to Keppel and Walter, this validated the use of the Groth typologies as murder categories. However, no statistical measures were used to delineate between the categories, and none of the empirical characteristics were ever published. The reliability of applying this typology to serial murder is questionable. In the original research conducted by Groth, the typologies were based on the verbal, physical, and sexual behavior of the offender. To obtain this information, the study utilized the reports of living rape victims as well as interviews with offenders. These types of accounts would not be present in ongoing murder cases. Additionally, a number of published research studies on sexual homicide, it is well documented that the behavior in cases of sexual murder is distinctly different from the behavior in rape cases. The primary difference is that in sexual murders, unlike sexual assault cases, the crime deliberately results in the death of the victim. Since the motivation for sexual murder is different from sexual assault, applying this typology without additional statistical measurement has little empirical integrity. In summary, all of these studies have questionable reliability based upon their research construction. They are either based on a small sample size, have a lack of empirical testing across the typologies or categories, or the statistical measurements conducted were never published. Moreover, much of the information was obtained by self-report information provided directly by the offenders and not independently verified. Therefore, the conclusions reached from these studies are arguably flawed and do not provide accurate information concerning the population of serial murderers. The use of specific typologies or categories by law enforcement is difficult. Utilization of these different typologies requires investigators to analyze an offender's subtle behaviors and actions. They must then interpret those actions and use the results to classify the offender into one of these predetermined categories. Compounding this, the individual categories share numerous characteristics between them. Further, the behaviors needed to distinguish between the different categories may not be present. As a result, they provide minimal assistance to law enforcement working on ongoing serial murder cases, since they are cumbersome to use and therefore may not help to identify an unknown offender. Myths. There are numerous myths regarding serial murder. These have been propagated by movies, books, and television. The myths generally hold that all serial murderers are white males who are evil geniuses and travel around the country killing multiple victims for sexual gratification. In addition, they state that serial killers are so cunning that they make purposeful mistakes that lead to their arrest because they secretly want to get caught by the police. They don't want to get caught. There are also myths based upon the earlier serial murder research. All serial killers were raised in dysfunctional or abusive families. They are loners who are incapable of maintaining a long-term relationship. They increase in the violence they inflict on the victims as the series progresses. They attempt to engage the police in dialogue and learn about the progress of the investigation by frequenting police hangouts. Once a killer starts murdering, he can never stop. If there is a time break in a series, the offender was either in prison, joined the military, went away to college, or was admitted to a mental health facility. All of these myths greatly contribute to the inaccurate base of information concerning serial murder to the public in general and law enforcement specifically. The proliferation of so-called experts or talking heads further contributes to the myths of serial murder. The different media outlets routinely utilize retired law enforcement investigators, psychologists, and others to provide running commentary on ongoing high-profile criminal cases. These media experts are interviewed to discuss active serial murder investigations without having first-hand knowledge or details of the crimes. They also do not have information on the course of the particular investigation they are commenting about. Additionally, a number of them do not have any law enforcement investigative experience. Instant assessments can be very detrimental to investigators working active serial murder cases because the erroneous information supplied can mislead potential witnesses or deter others from contacting the police with information about ongoing serial murder cases. Additionally, it is well documented that a number of serial murderers actually follow the media in regards to their crimes. When these media experts make derogatory and misleading statements regarding a serial murderer, they also risk inflaming the murderer. Their comments may also interfere with a law enforcement strategy regarding media statements by providing contradictory information. Historically, comments made by media experts provide little, if any, assistance to law enforcement attempting to capture a serial murderer. The majority of previous research on serial murder has given minimal assistance to law enforcement with working unsolved serial murder cases. Typologies and arbitrary categories that highlight subtle differences in serial offenders' mental state or developmental difficulties provide interesting perspectives. However, they provide minimal information that assists with the capture of an active, unknown serial murderer. These categories, coupled with the influence of the media entertainment industry and talking heads, have distorted the true nature of serial murderers. This study, consistent with the previous NCAVC efforts to assist investigators working serial murder cases, was embarked upon to provide investigators with information about serial murder that had a strong foundation in empirical findings regarding actual serial murder cases. More importantly, the focus of the study was to enhance the investigative information for law enforcement investigators working active unsolved serial murder cases. So I will end there. I'll do another one this week and we'll get through this whole thing. The next one will be the study parameters and results. So until next time, have a good evening.